okay.
Oh, cool. Wow. Okay. Wow, Heather's painting is beautiful. The underground. Wow. Wow, Owen.
But let me get the other computer then.
Dancing like that.
Or do you think that you can?
Yeah, I could get it. I could
Okay.
get it here.
Wow.
No. Oh, shoot. You know what? This one here. Oh,
All right. So I'm not sure you can still hear me. All right. Can you hear me now? I'm not necessarily seeing it. All right. Can you hear me now? I need somebody to give me a signal. Okay, my wife says that you all can hear me, so I apologize for that. Let me go ahead and introduce again what I was just saying. I'm glad that you guys were all able to come. Hopefully you were able to come early and got to see all the beautiful art that you all produced, the music, the poetry, the art. It is amazing. I had such a fun time putting it all together and putting it up there for you. And if you missed it, don't worry, I'm going to put it at the end of the stream. So if you wait till the end of the stream, we'll have it continue on after that. And by the way, if the kids who may have missed it, maybe we can come up with a way of collating it and putting it up at some other point so that you folks can see it again. But at least at the end of the stream tonight, you'll be able to see it. Well, I am very excited this evening because we are continuing our series in Living in the Light of Glory. And in this series, I am discussing with various folks and friends from our church, Christ Community Presbyterian Church, lovingly called CCPC, what it means for us to live now, coram Deo, before the face of God. And as we live in this life now and all the mess that we face, we live with an eye to glory, that hope that we have. And this evening, this week, we have a special treat because we are going to be having a panel of artists join us. And I'm very excited to have them. And I'm going to introduce them in just a minute, but there's just a really intriguing thing that happened. I did not plan this. I did not expect this, but interestingly, they all share something in common. They're all different artists. They have different characteristics. Their art is different, and nevertheless, they carry one thing in common, or most of them do anyway, and that is they all have Japanese descent, and which is amazing. And so let me introduce them to you right now. I'm going to pull them up, bring them in. Welcome, guys. And I'll introduce each of them separately. But we have Aaron and Luisa Casedo Kimura. Hopefully I said that correct. And Kimberly Brubaker. Is that pretty good? All right. And then Andrew Hook. We're glad to have all of you with us this evening. And I'm just going to change one other setting so that you all can hear them, because until I do that, nobody is going to hear anything. So, all right, now we have audio too for them. So hopefully you guys can say hi and welcome. I'm glad to have you here with us this evening. And I'm going to do a couple things. First, I want to introduce them by just asking them a little bit about themselves, and then maybe having them share a little bit of the art that they do. And so I'm going to start with Aaron and Louisa. And maybe just move Aaron, then Louisa. Share a little bit about your background in the arts, your background, sort of how you got involved in art and poetry in particular, and maybe if you have something to share with us, just as we saw all those beautiful slides coming through, maybe you have a piece that you'd like to share with us. So nice to have you, Aaron. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great to be here. We're very happy and honored that you asked us to join. My involvement with the arts, I've been involved with the arts for most of my life in one way or another. For me, it began really in the second grade when my parents signed me up for piano lessons. They had me take 8 years of piano lessons, and I hated every minute of it. But around the 4th or 5th grade, I was allowed to add an instrument. So I chose the drums and percussion. I thought drums and percussion a little more cooler than piano. So I studied drums and percussion, and throughout junior high and high school, I played in band, played in a couple orchestras and pit orchestras. And then I ended up doing my undergrad and graduate work in music. But by the time I reached my second year of graduate work, I realized that there was really no joy in performing music for me. It was more like a skill, like typing for me, rather than a passion or something in my heart. And I also realized that I had always been more visually oriented instead of orally. So what I did was I picked up computer graphics on my own to pay my bills. And then, as I like to say, I picked up a paintbrush to feed my soul. This is one of my paintings in behind us here. It's a still life, oil on canvas. But most recently, about 10 years ago, I discovered poetry because my wife discovered poetry, and she'll tell you more about that. But what happened was she started writing poetry, and she started asking me, showing me her drafts and asking me what I thought about them. And I had no clue. I knew nothing about poetry. So I thought maybe if I study on my own, write on my own, I could give her some reasonable feedback. She also started dragging me to poetry readings. And, you know, after being at a poetry reading and being inspired, I could not help but write my own work. I found that writing poetry sort of combined my previous artistic pursuits of music and visual art. I don't do music anymore. I still do visual art, but poetry combines both of them, sound and image, which I feel like I've kind of arrived at a medium that really seems to work for me. And so I primarily identify as a poet now, poet and a painter. Yep. No, I was going to read a poem of mine, but did you have a question? I do. I'm going to read one poem that it's about my mother, and it's also about hope and keeping hope alive, which I think is pretty relevant to us during this time. It's called What's Kept Alive. She crunches her walker into the sea of pebbles surrounding the stepping stones, tells me, this bush with flowers is Japanese. That one is too, but different. I hover close behind, ready with an outstretched arm as if to give a blessing. Pick that large weed near the lantern by its roots and throw it into the pail. My father planned and planted this garden 50 years ago, hidden behind the fence of their Santa Rosa tract home. But he's gone now. She hires a hand to rake leaves, prune branches once a month. Soon she'll be gone. I'll sell the house, return to Connecticut. A stranger will buy it, become caretaker of the garden, but won't know that from their San Francisco apartment, my father transported the Japanese maple, cradled in a small clay pot, the momiji, now guarding the north corner, and that my mother chided him for bothering with a dying shrub. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. That's moving. It's a moving picture of just the relationship and of your family, but also that sense of time passing and the closeness of the family. I appreciate that very much. Thank you for sharing. I've just been so blessed by everybody who shared so far tonight, and I'm all the people that were on the stream. And Aaron, thank you. It was a moving poem. Louisa, you're next. I'd love to hear a little bit about you and about your background as well.
Certainly. Thank you for inviting me to join. Unlike Aaron, I did not grow up as an artist. My mother loved poetry. My mother loved Colombian folk music. I was born in Colombia. My family's Colombian. And
She's Japanese, but by marriage.
yeah.
That's the connection.
You can own it. If everybody's Japanese except me, right? You're Japanese
Well,
by
you're
marriage.
honorary Japanese. And so through her, I learned the love of words. And but as an immigrant family, I wasn't wealthy growing up, and so we just had a lot of pressure to follow a traditional path. So I studied finance, which is completely wrong for me, and it's my undergrad, and then afterwards I went to law school, and but I had always just written on my own. But it wasn't until 2009, which coincidentally is actually the year that my mother died, that I was unhappy at work and figuring out what to do. And Aaron encouraged me to just focus on my writing. So that's what I did. I actually left my job as an attorney, and it was kind of strange, actually. Friday, I was an attorney, and then Monday, I started taking undergraduate classes at Southern. So one day I was an attorney, the next day I was an undergraduate student. And then from there, I got an MFA at Boston University. And since then, poetry has been my focus, poetry and teaching, and also some translations, but poetry has been my primary focus.
It's intriguing. We all come at art in different ways. Some of us remain amateur, and others of us leave our professions behind and go full into a whole new world of art. And it's a bold step. Maybe you could share a little bit about a little bit of your poetry, if you have anything, or writing, or any other writing that you have.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I have a poem that I thought would be appropriate because this time of year, all of us, or most of us in this area, head out to our backyards to tend to the garden. So this poem is called Forage. I turn clay soil, mound rocks, squeeze grubs with my fingers. My spade, the soil, a rasp, a dry northeast heat wave. When I was 5, Mama chopped my hair. Niña salvaje, wild child, always in a tangle, holes in your jeans, grass stains on your sweaters. Through my hair, wind, dust, twigs. Impatient bumblebees, we'll have flowers. I pull quackgrass, plant deep-rooted cowpeas, mustard, crimson clover. Watch for the stealth of a screech owl in flight. Write a letter to my dead mama. How does one awaken this conflicted land? Last night, a black bear in the neighbor's pool. Last night, I almost held berries for it in my hands. Thanks.
Louisa, that was great, and it evokes all the emotions that we feel right now. And I think it also pulled on some of those memories of time and earth, and I just appreciated it very much. Thank you so much, Louisa, for sharing. So Kimberly, I'm going to have you not share. So unfortunately, this is really sad, but she sent a link. So Kimberly is a dancer. She's a ballerina, and she sent a beautiful dance that she did. It was in Sweden. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. And I will share that link as soon as I possibly can. I'll put it into the description of this YouTube video so that everybody can look at it. But anyway, unfortunately, I don't have. It's a little challenging for a dancer to dance.
Well, I have a stage behind me. I'm kidding.
But maybe you could share a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, so I am currently dancing professionally with Valley Hartford here in the city. I started dancing when I was 6 years old, so pretty much out of the womb, I've been dancing around. And ballet really requires a lot of just focus and tenacity and endurance. And I would have to say, I kind of just stuck with it over the years just because I have been doing it for so long. And I can be a little stubborn, and I didn't want to give up on something that I've been doing since I was so young. Yeah, and I think, yeah, the Lord has definitely used my gift in dance, a part of my testimony too. I grew up in a Christian home, so that is definitely a blessing and the grace of God. But I think having been dancing pretty much my whole life, it easily became my identity. And the Lord taught me through literally stripping me of my ability to dance through an injury after I graduated high school, to just show me how it is a gift, but my identity is not in what I do, but is in Christ. And in that, there has been so much freedom. It's definitely been a process learning that. It's not just like I woke up one day. It's like I now understand. But the Lord has definitely shaped me more as a follower of Christ who just so happens to do ballet. And that takes the burden off of me. So it's not like I'm trying to dance to earn the approval of people or to just feel successful in my own eyes or in the eyes of others, but knowing that, when God's glorified, it's the burden's off of me, and I'm no longer striving, but just surrendering the gift to Him. My whole life has definitely been really cool to see how the Lord's just opened the doors and clearly wants me to continue dancing. It's been a journey, but it's been a lot of fun, a wild ride.
Well, thank you for sharing, and I definitely will get that link up so folks can see your dance. And I appreciate your willingness to share your history, and definitely we'll come back to this topic of faith and our art, and I want to explore that in quite some detail. But before that, I want to get to Andrew, Mr. Hook.
Hey.
Good to have you. I want you to share a little bit about yourself and your interest in the arts, in particular in poetry.
Sure, it's great to be here. Thanks. Kim is a really great segue into my story because my mom was a big dancer. She still is. She's still alive. She's in great shape. She did ballet. She did modern dance. She did choreography. She helped put on, stage productions. I grew up in a family in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where art was really promoted, I would say, especially because of my mom. We grew up doing all kinds of art, appreciating, theater, music. My mom also sometimes read some Edgar Allan Poe to me. I remember that when I was young. But for me, poetry has been a very strange and tumultuous ride. I think I wasn't really interested in poetry as a kid. Although I do remember fourth grade. I remember that a teacher that I really loved in fourth grade asked us all to memorize a poem. And a girl that I had a crush on with her friend memorized the entire poem called The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes, which is a long poem. It's like a story poem. These two girls got up and just flawlessly recited it, blew me away. I remember that. And then, from there until really college, I felt like poetry was something that was sort of forced on me. Like teachers asked me to study it and write papers about it, and that took some of the joy out of it. But there was some stuff I liked. So as far as I did not grow up in a Christian family, so a lot of things changed for me, and my whole outlook changed when I got saved in 1987. I was 23. So really my whole taste in poetry and what interested me in the arts in general completely did a 180-degree shift. I basically went from, being a sort of lefty anarchist art student, punk rock and psychedelic, mess. I went from that to just really appreciating the classics and the Christian classics of Western civilization. So that was a big change. I guess that it was really when I really started to love poetry when I was spending some time in the desert in Arizona, taking care of some land for a pastor friend. And I was out there sometimes for a week, 2 weeks at a time with no human contact whatsoever, just the coyotes. And I had the Norton anthology of, no, the Oxford anthology of English poetry with me in that trailer. And I really got into it. That's when I really got into poetry then. But that was after I had become a Christian. So, yeah, I love poetry, similar to Aaron. I was an art major. I used to paint. I used to draw a lot. But for me, there was a point where poetry kind of took over because poetry sort of includes, art, philosophy, theology. It all comes together for me in poetry. So I'm very passionate about it. And yeah, that's why I like poetry.
And you currently are writing poetry. I know that you. Oh, hold on, you guys can't hear me. Currently, you guys are writing poetry, and I know that you have something to share. So why don't you go ahead and, if you would, share a poem with us?
Sure. Um, this is a little ditty that I wrote. It's basically about what I call charismania or health and wealth Christianity. And it's called It's Okay, Best Lives Now. Tulsa, okay, named and claimed it, then prophetically proclaimed it. Ken and Gloria invested, slick, convincing, uncontested. Pretty boy preachers wowed the flock, making Christ the laughing stock. Their best lives yielding heresies, out Phariseeing Pharisees, as if their Western cowboy drawls could bless impulsive bank withdrawals. Unique to the U.S. of A., where truth is prophesied away, and churches spring like tares and breed while telepreachers intercede for breakthroughs, blessings, mammon's gold, their folly long ago foretold in frenzied tones. The healing tongue counts dollars where Paul counted dung. I'm sure they all believe it's true. They know it justifies fleecing you.
Well, man, Andrew, you come out of your poem. I can't help but hear you, and I think you got to be careful with those televangelist comments nowadays because we're all televangelists.
True. I guess you're a telepreacher now.
I know. Gotta be careful. But no, I really appreciate you sharing your poem with me. There's humor in it. There's obviously a pointedness to it too. But I appreciate that, getting some truth across in a way that is maybe not through the front door so much. And that's kind of art in a nutshell, that it doesn't come directly at us. I want to talk a little bit now to you guys, and anybody can jump in. I'm not going to go around in any order, and don't feel like you have to answer these questions. But I'm kind of curious how faith has impacted your art, or maybe your faith journey has impacted your art. You already talked a little bit about this, Kimberly, but anyone, you can jump in and talk some more, or if somebody else had any thoughts on sort of because I know from Kimberly, or I know Andrew and Aaron and Louisa, all three of you came from non-Christian homes, and so art changed for you at least a little bit. No, Louisa, you grew up Christian. You grew up in a Catholic home, but
Yeah.
definitely Andrew and Aaron didn't. And so it's kind of, I'd be curious to maybe even know if there was a shift in that. But anybody can talk about how faith has impacted your art.
Yeah, I was not, as you said, was raised in a Christian. I came to a knowledge of my faith in 1984. And I would say that what characterized my journey, and still characterizes my Christian journey, is a search for truth. And along with that, being an artist, I've always tried to discover, being a Christian, being a Christian, discover who it is God created me to be. The way I look at it is my fundamental being, I'm a Christian. That's who I fundamentally am. But being an artist is the kind of tool that I am in the hand of the Creator. And so my journey after becoming a Christian was to find out exactly what kind of tool that was. So that led me from music to visual art and now to poetry.
So it's kind of like, as you become aware of your identity as a Christian and aware maybe even in your identity as an image bearer of God, your questions then turn to, okay, as a reflection of my Creator, who have you made me to be? And that caused that shift in you to move from music or other pursuits towards now poetry, but even the visual arts.
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, right. One of my favorite Psalms, 139 says, tells me that God innermost being. So he made me, and everybody is made with a measure of this and a measure of that by the Creator. And so I've been searching for, what that combination means, in terms of my creativity.
Others, I think that speaks to maybe not just artists, but to anybody out there. As we think about who am I, the one who made me in my inner being, who am I, and what gifts has God given me to glorify God? You particularly touched on this as well, Kimberly, when you talked about being made to dance and how you find joy in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been really sweet to see how this is God's temple, this body, and I've learned lately how I don't just dance for the Lord, but dance from Him. So His Spirit that's dwelling within me is what causes me to create art, and that's been very eye-opening. Just understanding that, and I think it's in Romans, but it says how we're instruments of righteousness, and just how like this body of mine is an instrument that God can use to proclaim the gospel and in so many different ways. And like art is such a universal language. So seeing how, I can use this gift to be a light wherever I'm planted has been really sweet. Yeah.
One of the Psalms that I looked at this past week, Psalm 8, the psalmist David reflects on God's endowing man with the image of himself. He says, "What is man that you're mindful of him, the son of man that you care for him? You make him a little lower than the angels and you crown him with glory and honor." And the psalmist is just wondering at this reality that God has made us like himself. And one of the fundamental aspects of himself is that creativity, right? It's that ability to create and make. And, as you were talking, Kimberly, and you were sort of reflecting on your body as being for righteousness, like what does it mean for us as Christians to create in a way that brings glory to God? I'm just curious if others of you have wrestled with that question. And, we talked a little bit last night. It doesn't always mean painting pretty pictures or dancing in a way that always brings joy, but sometimes it also evokes other emotions. I don't know if any of you want to speak to that particularly.
Rob, you're still talking about how our faith journey relates to our art. Is that right?
Yeah. But you can jump into any question, other part of the
Sure.
question.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, after 33 years in Christ, it's easy for me to forget how lost I was before I got saved. And I think back on the kinds of poetry and the kinds of art that I liked back when I was, in college or shortly after, before I was Christian. And it's amazing. I mean, I was into very militant, Marxist, anarchist type, surrealistic, very rebellious poetry. That to me was where I was looking for meaning. And you know, I actually went to see um Amiri Baraka recite his poetry live at Columbia in the 80s. I also went to see Allen Ginsberg recite live in Colorado Springs. I was into all that stuff, you know? And it's hilarious because now, after 33 years in Christ, I love, you know, Christian poetry from the 16 and 1700s. I love Alexander Pope, Henry Vaughan, John Dryden, you know, Jonathan Swift. I mean, it's so getting saved in Christ just completely overhauled my aesthetics. And it's easy for me to forget that, you know, now in 2020.
Yeah, for me, I still tend to, well, I guess I was already a Christian when I started writing poetry, but I do tend to write very dark poetry many times. And it's just, it probably also has to do with when I started writing. And as I said, my mother actually died around the time that I started writing. And I have used, or I shouldn't say started writing, started officially writing poetry. And I have used that as a tool partly to process things for myself. But at the same time, I feel like many times when a poem works, I feel like, okay, you know, God gave me this poem, and these poems are not for me to keep to myself, but for me to share, not for my own glory, but because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. In fact, sometimes I think, you know, about poetry and art, and you know, you could think of it, and people don't give it enough value. And sometimes you can say, well, you know, it's in a way kind of meaningless. But then again, I mean, I love Ecclesiastes. That's actually my favorite book in the Bible. And it's just the idea that everything is meaningless unless we're doing it for God.
Mhm.
God is the one that gives meaning to
Amen.
it.
I think that's a really significant point, Louisa, and one that I think maybe part of what oftentimes artists strive after is looking for meaning, right? I think philosophers, artists, when they're doing their art, what they're looking for is something to make sense of the world, make sense of the suffering, even of the joy and the beauty. And one of the things that I think happens as we come to faith, or that we sort of wrestle with art and faith, is that we start to see, oh, the meaning is here. It's in who God made me. Even the brokenness has meaning. Even the darker shades have meaning in that piece of work. And I think that's important for us to wrestle with. It gives voice to the hope that we have too. Even the dark stuff gives, even as we wrestle with the brokenness of our past, or we wrestle with the brokenness of the world. As Christians, I think we can't help but in our art reflect some of that redemptive story, right? Which gives meaning and hope to our art. Maybe someone could speak to that as an artist. What does it look like to, even as we sort of wrestle with the darkness of the world, what does it mean to sort of reflect on redemption in our art?
We spoke yesterday, we touched on something yesterday that I think is really important, which is that, you know, God has a poetic dimension to his very being, because in the word of God, we find David writing the Psalms. And, you know, we talked about Psalm 88 being a real death trip, you know, a real depressive, dark, you know, emo, worse beyond emo. I mean, it's like a, you know, depressive black psalm. But then David also has the heights of joy. He has his moments of visionary, you know, transcendence, where he sees the beauty of God's creation. So I think it's important to recognize that those two extremes are part of God, part of God's revelation. And you think of certain parts of Job too. I love Job, right? I love chapter 28 of Job. Where can wisdom be found? So yeah, you've got the very staid parts of the Bible. You got Leviticus, but you also have the poetic splendor of the Bible. And it's, as Christians, I think we can really appreciate that.
So,
Yeah, and
go ahead, Kimberly.
I was just gonna touch up on the whole redemption. Yeah, we're all drawn to this to stories of redemption, and I think it's because we all are a part of a story of redemption, the gospel, and in order for there to be redemption, there has to be darkness that's portrayed. We're in a broken world, and that's when you see the light. And yeah, so it's there's something beautiful about creating art out of just raw emotion and being like you were saying last night, Rob, about being honest and vulnerable. And I think that draws people in, and through that, you see that we have a inherent need and hunger for like the one who created us and that light. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what artists have influenced you, or writers, and how they don't have to be Christian at all, because some of my favorite artists and writers are definitely non-Christian, but that have influenced the way you approach your work.
For me, I know that when I was in that trailer out in the desert in Arizona with just the Oxford Anthology and a Bible and a bunch of other books, it was for me like rediscovering the just foundations of Western literary culture. And it was as if I was thinking, whoa, this stuff was here all along. I was just too blind to see it. It took God saving me for me to be able to appreciate that. I have a book, let's see, is it over here? I have a book of Oxford Book of Christian Poetry. If you had shown, if my 17 or 18, 20-year-old self could have looked in the future and seen that I would love that book, oh my goodness, it would have seemed so boring, so dry, so dull, so Christian, So it's really amazing. Yeah. I don't even remember where I was going with that, but I just wanted to say that. Go ahead.
I think it's had a big influence on you, clearly, and on your faith and on your artistic work. Those older writers, I'm always
right. Okay. Yeah. Favorite artists or favorite poets. Yeah. So, like I said, back then it was like Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Allen Ginsberg. Lyrics of anarchist music. Now it's like Henry Vaughan. Thomas Traherne. Who are the great hymn writers like William Cooper. Isaac Watts. I mean, this stuff is poetry too. That's why I love the Reformed Church, because we have these great lyrics, man. Great lyrics. Isaac Watts.
John Newton certainly was a good poet too.
Yeah.
So, others of you.
I'll go. Yeah, someone who comes to mind is Madeleine L'engle, and she wrote A Wrinkle in Time, but she also wrote a book called Walking on Water, Reflections on Faith and Art. I actually have the book here. This is what it looks like. So if you want to read it, it's a yellow book. But she talks about what it means to be a Christian artist and how God is a creator. And so all of us who are made in the image of God, we're all called to create something, whether it's like something artistic or even like build a car or something, just to. And yeah, I read that book a few years ago, but it really just opened my eyes to what it looks like to be an artist, to use it to glorify God. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I would say my primary influence was not a Christian influence. And by the way, I do still Nikki Giovanni and all the poets.
My home girl.
But I think for me as an immigrant, especially growing up at the time that I did, um, I was born in Colombia, and I came here when I was 7 years old. But still, I mean, most of my education was uh, in English, but I still felt like I couldn't become a writer, not just because, I mean, yes, my parents were, in my family, you know, they definitely pushed me to more traditional ways that where you could actually make a living. But also, I just felt like I didn't, I didn't have the right to be writing in English, to be an English language writer. And at the same time, I didn't really have the skills to be a Spanish language writer, because you know all of my education had been in English, and I didn't really have any role models until I read Julia Alvarez. This was later on. I was maybe in my 20s that I read Julia Alvarez and Sandra Cisneros, and they served as role models for me. Like, oh, you know, maybe it is okay. And actually, Julia Alvarez talks about how she was writing, and she, you know, she also has similar story in the sense that, you know, she was born in the Dominican Republic, but came to the United States, grew up in the United States. When she would teach English, you know, she was a writing teacher, and the parents would complain, oh, you know, you don't have any Americans to teach, and so you have to get some Hispanic to teach my students English. But just reading them gave me gave me the strength to feel like, okay, yeah, I could do this too.
Encouraged you in that regard, encouraged you to kind of take this on. Though it's okay to do this. Yeah. Aaron, I think you had mentioned last night that there wasn't any one particular artist that impacted you, but I didn't know if there was any.
Yeah, you know, I have favorite artists. I don't think any of them are Christian that I know of. I tend to, and that's just the way it worked out. I tend to be drawn to, I'm a maker. That's how I describe myself. I make things, you know, as a visual artist, I make paintings, I make sculpture. As a poet, I make things with words. So I'm really drawn to craft. So it's whoever's craft I enjoy. For art, Giorgio Morandi is my favorite artist. Stuart Schill's my favorite living artist. There's, of course, Picasso, Van Gogh, all those artists I enjoy. And I have a lot of poets that I admire, but it's always pretty much based on how they construct a poem now. Not necessarily the content or the philosophy or belief behind it.
So the craft, and I think that's an interesting idea, because that we talked about this a little bit last night, was, and this is sort of a big question, but I think it's an interesting one to apply, which is, as Christians, you all do art, but you don't necessarily do Christian art. And we played with this idea a little bit. What is Christian art, and what does it mean to be an artist that's a Christian, not necessarily doing Christian art? Does anybody want to tackle that?
Well, one thing that I wanted to say is it makes me very thankful for the Reformed church and for the doctrines of grace and just, you know, Reformed Christianity, because I feel like in Reformed Christianity, we are all free to just get into whatever art we want, because we know that God is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. He's sovereign over all. If you want to listen to Led Zeppelin, cool, listen to Led Zeppelin. Like, you're not going to go to hell, you know? keep things in perspective, keep seeking God, but we're free to enjoy it all. And so that's something I find really refreshing, because I was in my early stages of my Christian life much more involved with charismatic and Pentecostal and much more legalistic forms of Christianity. And yeah, we were talking last night about, some churches preach that you can only watch Christian movies or look at Christian TV shows and listen to Christian rock. And some of it is pretty cringy, and it's, I don't know, I'd be interested for you guys to talk about this whole thing about, is it, do Christians have to be in this little niche market, or are we just free to enjoy it all? I mean, I want to hear what you guys say.
Yeah, I think definitely in the Christian arts, the level of excellence definitely drops down. And yes, there could be the heart behind it, but it's so important to uphold good art. And one thing I've definitely learned over the years is I don't have to, especially when it comes to my career, I don't have to explicitly like share the gospel through my dancing to glorify God, but just by pursuing excellence. And I think of Ephesians 2, where before the foundations of the world, God established the good works set before me to accomplish. And so by having that mindset of, getting my hands dirty, seeking excellence in my craft, that's glorifying to God. And that's what draws outsiders in. When you take your art seriously and your work seriously, people will take you seriously. And I think, yeah, so excellence is so important to be upheld in, especially the Christian arts.
Yeah, Aaron, when you were talking about you see yourself as a maker or a craftsman, that's kind of the picture I had in mind. Somebody who takes their work seriously and who desires to do it in such a way that creates beauty, or beauty in the broadest sense of the word, something aesthetic, and that sometimes can be explicit, I guess, as far as faith is concerned, but oftentimes it's reflecting universal truths that people can grasp their minds around.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to talk about excellence, and I think that's an excellent point that Kimberly brought up. I think it's so important to pursue excellence. At the same time, I realize that, God gives to each one of us a measure of this and a measure of that. Not everybody has the same level of intellect, talent, temperament, physical ability. So I think, as we seek excellence, it's important to realize that the bottom line is that we are faithful in whatever measure God gives us, and whatever that means in pursuit of that excellence.
I was going to add that sometimes, I was checking out your blogs today, and it's really interesting, this whole world of people who are, have the hobby of blogging or creating websites. And I was just thinking about how sometimes I think, gosh, if I'm Christian, I should be much more explicitly presenting the gospel with my poetry or with my blog. But then I step back and think, no, wait a minute. Sometimes just slipping in a very subtle, reference or using some imagery that may be Christian, that comes forth naturally, can be a lot more powerful. I've seen so many blogs and websites that are, in your face with scripture verses and saying, you need to accept Jesus, and my poetry is about telling you that you got to get saved, and here's the verses to back it up. And I don't think that, I think that actually almost can turn people off, at least within the context of art.
That would turn me off.
Yeah.
Yeah, even being a Christian. But I do think that it is something, I mean, that is something that's important to me. If I go up to, especially in the creative world, so many people are living less than godly lives. And they have this preconceived notion of what a Christian is. And if we come forth and just attack them with our Christianity. I think that what that does is it creates a wall, it creates a barrier.
Yeah.
Whereas if we are creating, but we're living our lives in a certain way, I think that the way that we live our lives is what matters most. Now, granted, there are certain things that I don't write about because I am a Christian that other people write about. But I don't think that my my poetry is necessarily Christian poetry. But that has allowed me, being this type of poet, has allowed me to make connections with non-believers. That if I wrote different type of poetry, I probably wouldn't have been able to. And then that could lend itself to other conversations, or like you said, Andrew, just sometimes, because I am a Christian, sometimes a certain thing will show up in my writing, even if it's not, just obviously Christian, but certain ideas, certain principles. And I do sometimes actually insert things from the Bible in my poetry. And I think that if I were more aggressive about it, it probably would just create a barrier.
Yeah, I want to echo with what Louisa said. My goal is to make a connection, is to open the door, create a bridge. And the way to do that is to find some common ground. And I think that common ground is to portray life as it really is, all the pain, the suffering, and what everybody goes through, in order to establish that, in order to lead to other conversations.
Yeah, and we have the Holy Spirit that's transcending through our work. And I think when curiosity is evoked in the audience, wonder where is that, that light coming from through their work, or where is that peace that they have, that joy, seems to just be rooted, so deeply rooted throughout whatever trials they're going through. So I think, what we do doesn't have to explicitly be so in your face about Jesus, but there's a time and a place, but the Holy Spirit ultimately does a work and endures, really.
I really agree with what you said, Kim, about there's a time and a place, and I feel like it's a struggle to maintain that middle ground, because it's so easy to veer off to one side. You know that quote they always attribute to Saint Francis of Assisi, I think, preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. So that's one extreme of like, just live your life and be loving, and they're just going to come to you to find the truth. Well, no, not really. But then the other extreme is to constantly be putting it in, pushing this thing, what's the word, polemics. I mean, I probably veer off more on that side of things. But we got to try to stay in the middle, and it's not easy, right?
And I think one of the words that comes to mind as I think about this sort of wrestling with how do you do your art in a way that reflects the glory of God in such a way that people see Jesus, even if they don't know they're seeing Jesus always explicitly, is the word honesty. And I think, Aaron, you were sort of alluding to this when you were talking about art, doing it in an honest way, doing it in a way that reflects all of life, the brokenness of life, the messiness of life, and the hope of life. I think it's painting that picture of creation, fall, redemption, glory, which is wrapped up into, it's weaving it in and out of every day, right? Every day is creation, fall, redemption is going on in our hearts and in our lives, and somehow maybe expressing that in our art in such a way that it's not just about sort of lifestyle evangelism, which I think isn't a bad idea, but I think, Andrew, you kind of alluded it to being maybe not enough, but it's also not in your face. It's it's living life as one who, and doing art as one who is an image bearer of God and a redeemed creature who knows the grace of the gospel. And so, James talks about being ready to share the hope that's within you. And I think it's hope that gets permeated out of us when, even in the midst of something really dark or black, maybe we're writing about something that is ugly, but in the midst of that, there's a sense of hope or light, or maybe there isn't, but somebody comes and talks to you about it, and your demeanor isn't all dark. It creates this disconnect. The person's like, but you wrote this. I was like, yeah, because that feeling is real for me, but I also have this, I don't know. Art is a unique tool that has an opportunity to sort of bypass some of those barriers in a different way than I think sort of polemics or didactic teaching. Does that make sense? I don't know. That's my own 2 cents as a non-artist. So
Absolutely. And I like the word tool. I mentioned that as well. And I think it's important for us to remember that in the end, only God can open eyes. Only God could give understanding. Only God can save, and use what we do in the process.
Yeah, when I was doing my MFA, there were 2 main projects that I did for at the end of the first semester. One was part of my thesis that I had to submit, and the other was an anthology of other people's work. And a lot of what I chose, and both what I was writing at the time and also what I chose in the anthology, a lot of it was just very intense, very dark things. But what my professor said, reading my work and reading, what I presented from other people was other people who weren't Christians, is how there was a certain light, which is, Kimberly, what you were saying, how there was a certain light in my work, even though I was still writing all these dark things. There's certain light, certain hope in my work that wasn't present in the other ones. So I think that it comes out many times, even if you are not conscious of it. But then again, what we're doing is what God has enabled us to do. And so as Christians and as work that we're doing that is guided by the Holy Spirit, we are, that does come through.
yeah, it almost can't help but come through, right? I think that's the nature of being a Christian. That hope necessarily comes out, explicitly or implicitly. And I think both of those means God uses. Well, we don't have any more time, right? This is our problem. So I want to ask
Finally
you
warmed up.
Andrew's just getting warmed up. But let me close with this question. There may be some artists out there who would like some advice. And do you have any encouragement for any budding or amateur artists like myself?
I do. I like to tell people who are pursuing art to find your own true voice, your own true vision, the vision that God has given you. Art is so subjective, and the way you find that voice, the one that God has given you, is to pay attention to what intrigues you, your likes, what thrills you. And I think that you also don't want to compare yourself to others, and do your work for others. It's important to learn from others, but above all, to follow and to pursue what it is that God's given you. Everybody is unique, and God has given you a unique voice and vision.
Yeah, I was going to say that while you were talking, first thing that came to mind was, yes, at the same time, don't compare yourself to others, because, you are not, because you're your own unique person, and also don't listen to negative voices. If it's something that brings you joy, do it. And if it's something that you feel like God gave you certain amount of tools with which to do it, do it. And some people will say, oh, you're wasting your time, or some people will say that it's not good. It doesn't matter, because somebody else will come along and like it at the same time. But also, we're not doing it really to please people. We're doing it because this is something that God has allowed us to do, and by creating, we are honoring God. And also, not everybody has to be a professional artist to enjoy art. You can enjoy art, enjoy creating, and you could also share it with people and bring joy to other people with your art, without necessarily being a professional artist. Or if it's somebody who feels that they have a calling to be a professional artist, then you follow that calling because that's what you feel like God is telling you, regardless of what anybody else has to say.
Thanks, Louise.
Yeah,
and
but,
Aaron. Kimberly.
Yes, one thing I would love to say to all you young aspiring artists is we're all works in progress. So as we're growing, our worldview changes. We're being sanctified every day. And so the way I view my art now is so different from when I first started it. And honestly, I was a late bloomer, and so at the time I didn't know if I could go professional or whatever. And you don't have to go professional to glorify God and enjoy it. But yeah, just work hard, and ultimately, like, take care of that craft that God's given you, and just see what doors He opens through it. Yeah.
Thanks, Kimberly. Any other thoughts to budding amateur artists, Andrew?
I would just say, I think we live in an age where the cult of, rebellion and iconoclasm and rebelling against previous forms, it's been so ingrained in us. It's like part of rock and roll, it's part of pop culture, it's part of fashion, right? But it's important to step back and see that stuff can be pretty shallow, actually, if you've never mastered the basics. Like Picasso actually mastered the academic, basics of painting before he went out and did all this wild, cubism and this avant-garde stuff. And so I wish when I was an art major and learning stuff, I wish that people had stressed to me the importance of just technique, mastery, because I think that it's easy to lose track of that in the age that we live in.
I think that's a good word. I'm going to stop here, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. You all out there in YouTube land have an opportunity to ask these guys some questions. And so what I'll do is I'll keep our conversation going just a little bit longer and give you all an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to follow the chat here. Just so you're aware, the stream has had a little bit of difficulty and has dropped a few times, so the delay might be even longer, but I apologize for that. But if you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them up into the chat, and I'm just going to ask a few wild card questions to these guys while you guys put your questions up there. So, what do you guys do for fun if you don't do art? Like, art may be your fun, but are there other things, other hobbies, other things that you enjoy?
I love to eat. Yeah, Luis and I, that's our favorite pastime, is eating. So we write, we paint, and we eat.
Wow.
And garden.
And garden. Well,
Gardening, yeah. Gardening. I was gardening today.
I have to apologize for 1 second because I have to get a battery for my camera.
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. With me, we talked yesterday about I don't know if it's always for joy that I do. It's like I'm compulsive about my poetry writing, so it may be a form of self-medication or therapy. But yeah, I love to go jogging. I love to go hiking. I love to go out with my family and visit places out in nature. Yeah, and gardening too. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I love the outdoors. So being in God's creation, that really inspires me as well. Yeah, I play the ukulele. That's like very amateur. Um, yeah, I just enjoy being with people and getting to know people's stories. Yeah, um, I enjoy all the things you could do outside, really. Yeah.
Kim, I was curious about the whole Japanese thing. Are you a quarter Japanese like me?
I'm a half. Hapa. My mom's half. My mom's full. Sorry, my mom's Japanese.
Oh, so you're half. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
Well, if there are no questions, I'm really grateful for the chance that I've had to hang out with you all. And you're gonna leave. You're gonna give them this break and not ask any questions. I'll read some of the comments in case they're not checking them. Ruth Gay says, "I like the idea of expressing your gift in whatever measure you are given. That perfection or high skill level is not a requirement for expressing your gift for God's glory and creating beauty." I really appreciate that sentiment. Dave S. says, "Music's only purpose should be the glory of God and the recreation of the human spirit." And that was a quote from Johann Sebastian Bach. Yeah, I think that's our ultimate purpose, right? Like that is our purpose, is to glorify God. And that's an interesting statement by Bach. We could talk about that some. Justin Moreau says there's a lot of great Christian hip hop and metal, though. I don't know these things. Maybe somebody else has listened, but I don't doubt it. In fact, what I would say is I think that oftentimes Christian art has grown, right? Like it's gotten better over time. I think when I was young, it was really bad. I don't know. I don't know what you guys think about that.
It's strange because with my family, I always tell them that I can't stand most Christian pop in English. But then I'll tune into the Spanish station and I'll be listening to merengue, bachata, cumbias, even reggaeton. I despise reggaeton music, right? But if it's on an evangelical station in Spanish, I like it because I'm so message oriented that as long as it's about Christ and Jesus and the gospel, I love it. I don't care if it's reggaeton, metal, death metal, whatever.
I think I have more trouble with that. I don't know. We have a question. Here we go. Emily Mancini says, "Kim, what does your day on the job look like?"
Good question. Well, right now it's different, but usually we would have rehearsal from 9 till about 1:30 or 2. And that also leaves time for us to have another part-time job. But yeah, the time is just spent rehearsing. And we always start with an hour and a half technique class, which is our warm-up. And that's where we can really refine our technique. And so then we go into rehearsal, we're all warmed up, and we just go through each piece that we've been rehearsing. Sometimes we'll have outside choreographers come in from other companies. And that's been really cool, just creating innovative art and being exposed to other artists. So that's kind of what the typical day is like. It's Monday through Friday. Yeah.
I've always thought of dancers, Kimberly, as some of the most disciplined people I've ever met. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly my experience with dancers have been they tend to be extraordinarily disciplined, and it's kind of like a combination of artist and athlete all mixed into one.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true. It's basically a sport, but you have to make it look pretty. That's the thing. Yeah. It takes a lot of yeah, blood, sweat, tears, it's all in there. Many times when I almost quit, but yeah, I would definitely say it's worth it for me. Yeah, it's been a journey though. Yeah.
So we have a few other comments here. Ruth Gay says, what do you think of Christian popular music trailing or mimicking secular popular music? Maybe that gets at the heart of what the problem is. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, some of the hymns that we sing in the Christian church, we don't realize that many of them were grafting the words written by Christian poets onto popular melodies of the day, things that were basically like pop music at the time. So, I think once again, you got to find that middle ground. I mean, I think that Christian pop artists, if they're mimicking the worldly form, in a kind of a superficial way, it's not going to be very good. But if they got some little extra creative oomph in there, it could be really good.
Mhm.
I know some Calvinist rappers that, I don't normally like rap that much, but these guys are doing like pure Calvinist doctrine in hip hop. And it's amazing. I love it.
Well, I think actually Justin Moreau highlighted a few of them. KB and Shai Lin are two really good
Shay Lin, yeah, that's the guy. Shay Lin,
rappers.
Shai Lin, that guy.
Also Kanye's latest album. So, yeah, I don't see, that's the thing. I think Christian art has taken a turn for the better. But I would say almost all art and music, and maybe this is not fair, and you are artists, so you can disagree with me. But it's all derivative, right? To a degree, right? We always build on what has come before us. We add things, but it seems to me that you almost can't help but borrowing. I don't know any other way to do art. Is that a fair statement?
Well, they say a good writer borrows, a great writer steals. So, but it's about making things your own. So yes, we are building on what came before. I think that's just the way that the world functions in general. I mean, also inventions. They have, somebody didn't just come up with electricity. That was a process of other people coming up with various things, and then you had electricity. So everything builds up, one thing builds on another. And it's the same thing with art.
Yeah, I think innovation is so key to whatever you create, and not putting yourself in a box like this is what Christian music should sound like. But I think of like there's Beautiful Eulogy, they're Christian rap artists, and they're just very innovative with different sounds, depth with the lyrics. I think of like Josh Scarrells and all those artists who are Christians, but they're constantly like, I don't know, creating stuff that you've never heard of before. Yeah, and even if it is derivative of something, it's so innovative and it's intriguing and yeah, very attractive in that way.
And honestly, like Louisa was saying, that goes for all of everything. I think everything is derivative, and because ultimately we're deriving our creativity from the Creator. I think one of the challenges that we face as artists in our rebellion is that we want to sort of divorce ourselves from the Creator and try to create something that reflects on us and makes us glorious, right? Like that's the ultimate rebellion. And, I think it's just interesting to me to think about, yeah, we all take something, shape it, make it innovative, but ultimately what we're doing is reflecting some piece, some aspect of the created world around us that God has made. Anyway, that's really interesting thoughts.
Aaron and Luisa mentioned their love of cooking earlier, and I was thinking about recipes, right? I mean, art is sort of like recipes. You've got a standard list of ingredients. You're trying to make a dish that many others have cooked many times, and maybe you've even cooked that dish many times. But then you try something different, right? You throw in some different spices, or you you didn't have one ingredient, so you put something else in there, and wow, all of a sudden you've come up with something really tasty, right? So a sonnet is like that, right?
Yeah.
It's got these rules, how many lines, how the structure, but then you make it your own. So yeah, I thought of cooking.
Mm.
So many forms of art. Justin says the style of art mentioned here, and I think, Justin, you mean the style of art just that we've been talking about, reminds me of Tolkien's approach to writing. Maybe, Justin, if you could throw what your thoughts on Tolkien's approach to writing are, that would be great, and then we could discuss it. Emily says, Aaron, what is your style of art? And I think she means visual art. And do you sell it somewhere online or in a gallery?
Yeah. First of all, my style, if I have to put a name to it, I would say I identify most with post-impressionism. Cézanne, sort of principles from Van Gogh. And yes, I do have a gallery. It's the Chester Gallery down in Chester, Connecticut. I don't have an online store, but I am on social media, and people have seen things that I've posted and have messaged me and bought things from me in that way. And you can go to my website and see things that I've painted before. I don't have any new things right now because I've been very busy getting an MFA in poetry at BU, at Boston University. So my painting has been a little on hiatus.
Well, I'm going to hopefully put up some of the links to the blogs that were sent to me, and also to Kimberly's dance video that she shared with us. What I'd like to do now is thank everybody for coming. I appreciate the time. We went well over an hour. I figured that was going to happen, but I appreciate those who came out to listen and to watch. I'm going to go ahead and leave the stream going with some of that beautiful art from our congregation, and I would encourage you all to take a look and enjoy that. I'll keep it up for 15 minutes or so, and look forward to seeing you all again in person, hopefully sooner than later. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
everybody. It was fun.
Thanks,
Sayonara.
everybody. Yeah.
Sayonara.
Sayonara.
That's right, there we go.
Arigato, arigato.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Bye, y'all.